Hey everyone, welcome back to our podcast, Music Artists, The Vision and Decisions. How are you doing today, Eric?
I'm doing great. We're here today to talk about working with producers.
It's a good segue since our last podcast was actually about whether or not you should buy your tracks online or go with a producer. So we figured we might as well continue on with that topic. Finding the right music producer to fit your vision as a music artist can be very tricky. And so we're hoping some of these topics that we're going to cover will make it easier for you to decide who to work with and how you want to work with them. So when it comes to finding a producer, what would you recommend right off the top, Eric?
Most things when you're looking for something, whether it's food from a restaurant or anything, you just go to the web and you type it in and you look for it. It's going to be difficult to find a producer that way. It's not impossible, but most producers aren't going to be out there advertising. It's going to be word of mouth, other artists. So your best approach is to ask some other artists that you've worked with or know and see what they've used or what they recommend. So there are a couple of sites that you can use where you would just look for a producer or a vocalist or a guitar player, and you can, listen to samples of their work and whatnot. But the best way, I think, is if you get a recommendation from someone who's used that producer before. That's the best way to go. And while we're talking about the samples of their work, that's one good way to know if you're going to find somebody musically that's fitting what you're looking to do. Most producers will have some kind of work
Portfolio.
Yeah, it's really our calling card as to what we've done.
I think communication is very important, and ease of communication. Are they interested in your work, and are you able to convey what you want done, and are they able to understand what you want done in your song?
So communication is extremely important. I will say that most producers, that's not their top skill set, communication. Now, communicating about a song is, but general communicating and saying, being realistic with deadlines and responding quickly and just staying in the loop with the artist, that's where sometimes it gets a little tricky. So each person's going to have a different personality when it comes to that. But definitely take it into consideration, because as an artist, you'll feel more comfortable if you have open communication options with whoever you're working with. And the other thing, when you're working on a song and you tell your producer, well, I want it to sound tropical. Well, that's like 100 different ways.
Yeah.
So I would say be as specific as possible with examples and maybe other artists that are in that sort of genre, that sort of vibe that you're going for. Every time I work with a new artist, the very first thing I tell them, we're basically hadn't even hit a note yet. I tell them it's important that they be open and honest about where we're going on this venture, because the last thing we want to do is get all the way to the end and they're like, well, yeah, this isn't really the vibe that I was going for. So in general, when you're dealing with people in this industry, there are a lot of egos, but you can't be afraid to say you don't like something.
Right.
And it's important, because as a producer, I want the artist to be happy and proud of what they've done. And certainly I want to be proud of it as well. But I want it to represent their idea. And sometimes that's difficult because the idea is in someone's head and we're trying to make it into something that we can hear.
Because, at the end of the day, if you're the artist, it is your song. So if you don't like something, you need to let them know, because they won't know. And it might be scary at first to tell this person that maybe has like 30 years of experience producing, but that's why they're there. They're there to help you. And at the same time, I will say, let them know, but also trust their instinct or their understanding of the music. If you're wondering, can I do this or this? And they bring it up and they're like, I don't think that's going to be a good fit. If it's a good producer, they just will let you know they don't think that'll work, or maybe we need to try another route. And you need to take that in consideration.
That's a good point. I was just going to say that if you are sensing that it's not sounding or going in the direction that you want, you may phrase it first as a question. You might ask why it's going in this particular direction, and then allow the producer to explain what they're trying to do. So there may be a way to correct the vibe that you're going in if you just ask simple questions.
Right.
And then if the producer has something very specific in mind, then they can let you know, okay, well, this is what I'm trying to do here. And then it might make more sense to the artist. And if it doesn't, then at that point, you offer other alternatives to achieving the sound that you're going for.
It all comes back to communication. Both parties need to have good communication in order to get the song and the vision that you're going for.
So when it comes to the timeline, this may be a part of the process that may seem a little foreign for someone who's new to working with the producer. It seems logical that this wouldn't take very long, and you would think, in 2 weeks I'll have my song out for people to hear. Well, usually it doesn't happen that way. It's a process. So it's one of those questions that you could ask your producer. Set some realistic goals for getting the song produced and finished. There's a lot of steps when it comes to producing a song. In today's studio world, a lot of pieces are done in one studio and another part done in another studio, and there's multiple layers of production that are going on. So I would just, depending on the song, the complexity of it, I would just be upfront. If you knew that you had to have a song out by a certain amount of time, that would be one of the very first questions to ask. Can we make this happen within this amount of time? Because I've done songs in one day, completely done.
Yeah.
But that's usually not the case. Because we're normally working through it, and sometimes the top line or the lyrics aren't even, finished when we start the music. So,
yeah, that's a good point. And honestly, I usually feel like having some time to sleep on it and let your ears adjust, because it's gonna sound different the next day. So you might be in the studio for 8 hours working on something, but if you could get lost in the perspective until you rest on it for like a day or two. And that's, to me, that's when the song really starts to come together, is when you think on it and you sleep on it and you consider it. Another thing I will say, finding a producer and communicating with them is references. Like we talked about this a little bit earlier, like the vibe, but sending them styles like what Eric said in the genre. It's not that they're going to copy that. It's more of like the sound, the style, the vibe, and we use this in mixing as well. But that's very important, and you don't have to think, oh, they're going to copy this, I want to be original. You can still be original, but if you're going for a certain genre, then that's one thing. If you want to come in and completely be like, I'm going to do something crazy, that's a whole different story, and you can definitely do that. But if you want to stay within your genre, within your style, and you can experiment with that style and that genre, but it's just good to have a base, a foundation to start.
More often than not, when you create a song idea, you already kind of know, you can pin it down to some kind of genre or a vibe or a groove. So the reference is merely there for a musical representation of what you're going for. Because I can explain, as an artist, I can explain to a producer what I'm trying to do. But if you hear something, and if a producer hears something, that answers a lot of the questions. Instrumentation, tempos and vibes, how does a song make me feel? So I think they're important.
Yeah. So moving on from finding a producer, which, again, there are many resources. We do say, talk to your local artist. If there's an artist you like online, maybe reach out to them, as unless they're the big artists, which most likely they're not going to respond. But, some of the smaller intermediate artists might respond to you and be like, this is our producer, he's really good. You can also find them on credits. So those are some options. Now, moving on to pricing and budgeting for producers, the price can vary pretty greatly. I would say average price for a starting artist working with the producer is anywhere probably 300 on the very, very, very low end, up to 3,000 or 4,000, and there is a reason that varies. If you want to touch on that a little bit.
So something like an example of a $300 to $400 to $500 producing job would be limited instrumentation. More than likely, it wouldn't require much programming, so it would be live acoustic guitar, live piano, more live instrument playing, and simplistic in nature. So you might only have, a couple of guitars, piano, bass. The drums at that price point would probably be all samples, if any. For a long time, a real big market for producers was doing cover tracks, and it still is. We'll take a popular song and someone will want to cover it, and they'll do a stripped down version, an acoustic version. That would be falling in at the lower end of the spectrum for pricing. Also, that what factors into that is when you're doing a cover as a producer, you're not writing anything. You're merely taking what's already been written and putting a different spin on it when it comes to instrumentation. But when there's writing involved and the producer's using their experience to craft a song, then that adds to the price, because that's what we get paid for. We get paid for our creativity and our experience and our ability to produce music, to produce it from nothing. So you get up into the higher prices when the song gets a little bit more complex. So that's one of those questions you ask at the beginning. You talk about what you're trying to achieve with this song, and then
I think laying down a foundation like for your budget is good as well, because if you come into it and you're like, I have X amount of money to spend, most producers will try to work within your budget. I just think it's beneficial for both parties to know what your budget is, so that way you can really work within your means and not blow out your price, but then also get what you want. The price can increase just depending on what you're going for, and that is really, the producer will typically recommend, hey, this song I feel like needs real strings. I know it might be out of your budget, but it will help to take your song to the next level. And that's just something you're going to have to consider down the road if you want to trust them, or I understand sometimes you need to work within your budget, but a lot of times the producer will typically recommend, a good producer will recommend stuff that thinks they're going to take the song to the next level and really help you shine as an artist.
So if you have a song and it's piano, vocal, and string quartet, more than likely the song's going to benefit from a real string quartet, because the strings are going to be very predominant in the song. If you have a song that has 75 music tracks in it, then you can get away with using samples, especially if it's layered amongst other chordal type of instruments, lots of pads,
keys,
and synths.
pads, and
So, I think at that point, you have a good working relationship with the producer and trust their experience to offer you the right solution when it comes to things like that. Same thing with drums. Sometimes live drums are necessary to achieve the sound that you're going for, and other times maybe it's not.
Right. So, and then continuing on budget just for a little bit longer, there's a few things to consider also. The standard for price or paying a producer is going to be typically half up front and half when it's delivered, so that there's some accountability and make sure they finish your song and get it delivered. And then maybe if you can't do that, it's something you might want to ask your producer and see if they'll work with you. They may be able to work within your means. Now, another thing to consider also, depending on the producers and your contract that you're going to sign, and that is very important, they could be wanting credit on your streams, and it's pretty standard in the industry, and it's something to consider. And I think that's a topic for a whole nother day, but that is definitely something you would want to look into and make sure your contracts are signed and make sure your contracts are looked over and they're good to go. Going off of budgeting, Our producer Eric, who's sitting with me, talking about this, he's been doing this for many, many years and worked with many clients. And so I want to just give you a quick walkthrough, or he's going to give you a quick walkthrough of just like a new client, fresh client from start to finish, and just a quick rundown for us.
Well, it starts with more than likely a phone conversation, talking about the project. We'll just for this purpose, we'll just say it's one song, the one song, and finding if we're a good fit to work with each other. After that, we'll meet in person if we live in the same area. If not, it could be a video conference call,
right,
or something like that. And at that point, let's assume that we're in the same city, and we meet at the studio and get into some of the basics of the song, which is the chord structure of the song, the melody, and the arrangement. And again, let's assume that this song is finished lyrically. We have all the verses and choruses and bridges and breakdowns and all that stuff already set. Then what we would do is talk about big picture ideas, the vibe of the song, what kind of sound are the drums and the guitar is going to have, if that's what's in it. And then once we lay that out and get the arrangement, then normally I will go to work on the song, and using the information that was provided to me from the artist, build out what we call like a rough draft of the song. And then working with the artist, probably do a scratch vocal on top of that. And at that point, if everybody's feeling that the vibe is good, then that's where it gets more surgical on the producing side, and we start really making the song come to life. What we'll do at that point is start adding some of the ear candy, which is rises and falls and impacts and that kind of stuff like that.
Percussion and different types of stuff. Yeah.
And then the song sort of takes on a life of its own. A lot of times I'll play a part, and that part will lead to another part, and that part will lead to another part. And then once the track gets to where it needs to be, and only thing it's really missing is, are the vocals, is we'll figure out how we're going to get the vocals recorded. There's lots of options, but the preferred option is to go into our studio here in Dallas and track the vocals in a controlled environment, so that we get a good sound on the vocals and get the right mic for the right song. And at that point, there's going to be post-production that goes on, whether it be adding more parts vocally, harmonies and ad-libs and that kind of stuff like that.
32 stacks of vocals.
Yeah. Well, depending on the song.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not unusual to have 40 tracks of vocals. And then, there's even more detailed work when it comes to editing the vocals and
tuning, and most things are tuned.
Yeah, but more than likely the normal process is for the vocals to be tuned, not just tuned but aligned, especially on the stacks, that kind of stuff like that. So, at that point, it's probably just about ready to go to mixing.
And mixing is a whole nother ball game, which we will definitely be talking about in another episode. But for now, we'll just keep it to producing. And then after mixing, of course, it goes to mastering. And then the final stage is Spotify and whatever streaming services you want to release it on, however you want to release it, get it pressed to vinyl. And that's another thing we can talk about as well. But so thanks for doing that quick run through. And it is a quick run through. It can vary. It definitely varies from artist to artist, actually, depending on what they want. If there's a band involved, if there's more than one artist, things can vary. But having a quick rundown and just visually understanding, okay, this is the process, can help you going into it to understand it a little bit better and what to expect when you're working with a producer. Any other side things you would like to say before we end this episode?
At the end of each project, the artist, it's their song. It's going to represent them as an artist. So they need to be proactive in all the aspects as much as they can be. I understand that sometimes they might not know like some terminology, but just simple communication would get the job done. But you have to be adamant about what you're looking for and try to be as concise as you can when given your ideas, because it's going to be your song and you want to be proud of it. And as a producer, I want to be proud of it as well. That's what I'll say about that.
And that's what I'll say about that.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's good. It's good advice. And hopefully, this episode can help you in your search for a producer, working with a producer, things to expect. Maybe you knew this all, maybe you didn't. We think it could be beneficial to you. And it's such a broad topic. We could talk about it forever, but we want to keep this concise for you, easy to understand. But in the future, we might come back to this topic and maybe talk more specifics areas of production. For now, that's all we're going to touch on. And so my name is Tyler Norris, and
I'm Eric Ferris.
So we are Maggio, and that's MA6IO. You can find us at ma6io.com. That's our website. So make sure you like and subscribe this episode. It really helps us out, and we hope that you found some information that you can use.